we appreciate it. Appreciate the turnout. Glad that it's inside today as opposed to last week. We had a little bit of a blustery morning last week. You know, a lot of attention has been paid lately to domestic violence, especially when it comes to homicides. I don't think you could look any further than the situation we had this past weekend out on Kilbourne Drive. You know, murder-suicide out there, just so tragic. And, you know, we're going to get into that a little bit more in just a little bit. Just about 25% of our homicides this year, I was talking to Sergeant Varnum with our domestic violence folks, just about 25% of our homicides this year have some type of domestic violence connection. That's really hard for a lot of people to get their head around, especially given the fact that, you know, there's just so many initiatives and resources and operations and education campaigns that we, along with a number of our partners, get involved with to really get that information out. You'll see somewhat of a crowded doorway over there. We have representatives this morning from Safe Alliance, tremendous partners in this endeavor when it comes to focusing on victims, trying to make victims survivors. You know, that's really, at the end of the day, what we all hope to accomplish. And our new district attorney, Spencer Merriweather. A lot of you, if you're paying really close attention to the news cycle, remember that Mr. Merriweather feels so strongly about programs that are victim-focused that he took the time his very first week in office to assemble a special victims team that focuses on domestic violence and child abuse and sex assault. In talking with Sergeant Varnum, he threw some wild numbers out, you know, that just really kind of shocks the conscience. 52 of the homicide suspects that we were able to identify this year out of 84 homicides have 38% of them have a domestic violence connection. So out of the 52 of them, 38% of them have a domestic violence connection. I mean, DV's here, right? It's I don't know if we go as far as to say it's an epidemic, but it sure is concerning, especially in light of the numbers that we're seeing this year. So despite all those initiatives and efforts that we're talking about, I want to invite Sergeant Varnum up to talk a little bit about something that's gotten the attention of all of our partners, including us here. It's an initiative that was launched in San Diego back in 2005, and it's just proven to have some tremendous results. And I'm not going to steal too much of his thunder, but I would really encourage you to pay attention to what Sergeant Varnum has to say, because it means the difference, a big difference for a lot of folks involved in some of these toxic relationships in our community. Sergeant Varnum.
Thanks, Rob. Good morning. Thank you. My name is Craig Varnum. I'm the supervisor of CMPD's domestic violence unit. And as Rob said, we're here today to talk about domestic violence. We all know what that term means. We know the definition. We know the legal term of that definition is dictated by our state statute. I was at a conference last week, and I heard what I think is one of the best definitions of the phrase domestic violence I've ever heard. One of the speakers said that they had recently worked with a survivor and her 8-year-old child. And they were talking to the 8-year-old child about what had happened. The child's mother had been brutally assaulted. And they asked the child, do you know what domestic violence is? And the child said, domestic violence is what people who live together and should love each other do when they don't love each other. They hurt each other. It's the most poignant definition of domestic violence I've ever heard. When people who are supposed to love each other hurt each other. So that's what we're talking about. As Rob alluded to, I would use the word epidemic to describe the problem and the social problem that domestic violence is. As a police organization, we spend more time investigating crimes of domestic violence than any other crime that we respond to. We average about 35,000 calls for service per year that are related to domestic violence. In 2016, we responded to over 41,000. Out of those, fortunately, not all rise to the level of a criminal offense report being taken. We average about 9,000 criminal offense reports for crimes of domestic violence annually. If you break those numbers down, it's 170 a week, 25 a day. So 25 times a day in our community, and that's just Charlotte-Mecklenburg. That's not including numbers from our partners in our townships like Huntersville, Matthews, Mint Hill. That is just Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, 25 crimes of domestic violence per day in our community. That is the epidemic level of the problem that we're facing. As Rob alluded to, we also know that domestic violence abusers are not just dangerous to their intimate partners. They're dangerous human beings. They're dangerous to society. Out of the 52 known homicide suspects, 38% had a history of prior crimes of domestic violence. That tells us that this isn't just a problem for families. It's not a problem that we don't talk about and keep it behind closed doors. It's not a problem that gets solved with marriage counseling or faith-based counseling. All of those things are great, but this is a problem that affects every single person in this community. So, having said that, what are we doing about that? There's a tremendous amount of resource in this community. We're fortunate for that. We have a large number of folks in this community that have worked for a very long time, very diligently, very dedicated to victims and helping victims navigate the path from victimship to survivorship. However, the number of resources in this county can actually become cumbersome, and quite unintentionally and quite unknowingly. What we have ended up with is a system that is nearly too cumbersome for a victim to navigate. So this is an example of some of the pamphlets that we give to victims when they are the victim of a crime of domestic violence, sexual assault, elder abuse, etc. So we have way more than what I'm holding in my hand. We have a rack of pamphlets and flyers with great information and great resources and great people on the ends of those phones that answer the phone when people call these numbers. However, over the course of the first several days after someone is victimized, after having gone through what may have been the most traumatic experience of their life, we're asking them to navigate all of those resources. We have an existing program in Buncombe County that did a study that found out in the first 3 days after a victim was the victim of what could have been a brutal assault, they are asked to access these resources. And in the first 3 days, they must go to 8 different locations, speak to 12 different people, fill out 61 forms, 61 pages of paperwork related to the event that they just went through. And these are people who may not have the financial means or transportation. These are people who may not have ever been in this urban environment to navigate all of these government buildings and parking decks and public transportation. And I would challenge anyone in this room who is familiar with those locations to accomplish that in a successful manner. And we're asking folks who may not be familiar with it, who may not have financial means, who may not have child care. We're asking them to do all of these things while suffering incredible trauma and trying to get their lives back together and the lives of their children back together. So, having said that, what are we doing? As Rob alluded to, last week there was a conference in Greensboro, North Carolina. It was a statewide conference on the creation of something called a Family Justice Center. It's not a new initiative. It is new in our community. There are over 130 existing family justice centers throughout the country. As Rob said, it's a movement that started in San Diego by an organization called the Alliance for Hope International. The first family justice center opened its doors in San Diego in 2002. Since then, numerous locations around the country and in our state have opened family justice centers. In a nutshell, it takes all of these folks, all these number of resources in our community, and put them under one roof. So instead of a victim having to go across the street to talk to a Safe Alliance advocate and down the road to talk to someone at Community Support Services to get counseling for their child, and coming here to talk to a police officer and going across the street to get a 50B, they go to one place. And in that one place are co-located police officers, advocates, medical professionals, counselors for both child and adult victims, elder abuse specialists. All of these folks are co-located under one roof so that they are communicating and they are providing uniform, holistic, wraparound services to a victim. And what that does is it focuses on the victim. It is 100% victim-centric, and it guides that victim down the path to survivorship. What it also does, in every single established community in this country, to include the ones here in North Carolina, Buncombe, Guilford, Alamance counties, after a family justice center opens, they see radical changes. Their overall domestic violence calls for service go way down. In San Diego, they decreased their domestic violence calls for service by 50% in a 6-year period. That's very significant. If we did that, we'd go from 41,000 to 20,000. That's a huge savings. So not only are we saving lives, not only are we improving the service that we give to victims, we're saving money at the same time. All of these other communities have seen radical decreases in their domestic violence homicide rates. San Diego went from 30 homicides in 1985 to 3 in 2013. Buncombe County had 13 homicides in 2013. They opened their Family Justice Center in 2015. They had 0. They've seen an overall reduction to date in 90%. Those numbers are mirrored and echoed in every community in this country that have opened their doors to a Family Justice Center. There were nearly 40 people from Charlotte-Mecklenburg at the conference in Greensboro. That is the level of the collaborative effort, desire, and momentum towards the creation of a Family Justice Center in this county. We know that we will have a Family Justice Center in this county. It is up to everyone in this community, the citizens of this community, and our elected officials to decide when. To decide that it's a priority, to decide that 14 intimate partner victims losing their lives this year is unacceptable, and we say no more, and we say enough. This is a results verified, proven best practice to not only enhance the quality of life and the survivorship of victims, but it also provides greater accountability to abusers. We see increased homicide prosecutions. We see increased overall aggravated assault prosecutions because these victims are given the tools that they need to remain engaged in prosecution. So that is the momentum that we have. That's the direction that we're moving in. And I would defer to District Attorney Spencer Merriweather to also add a few comments about this. But I can't underscore the level of the collaboration and the collective one-mindedness that we have in this community toward the creation of a Family Justice Center here in Charlotte. Thank you.
Good morning. Let me start by saying that, in fact, domestic violence is indeed an epidemic. And what that means is that our community is sick. We are suffering from something. In terms of domestic violence, we are a community that needs treatment. One of the ways that your district attorney's office has sought to, in fact, make ourselves effective on behalf of this community is by creating a trauma-informed prosecution team in the DA's office. The Special Victims Team is, as was earlier described, is composed of prosecutors solely dedicated to the prosecution of sexual assault, the prosecution of domestic violence, the prosecution of child abuse. We believe that these crimes are indeed unique and indeed special. They are about people who seek to exert control and power over people in a negative way, and we seek to address that. We hope to be there. We will be there for the victims and survivors of these crimes. And it is extremely important that we create an atmosphere where they are nurtured, where they are empowered. And that is why we stand with you today. We stand shoulder to shoulder with law enforcement, with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, with all of our service providers in this area. We stand shoulder to shoulder with them because we realize that's the only way that a sick community can get well. So we are committed. We are redoubling our efforts. I can promise you that over the course of the next year, our prosecutors will not only continue to seek evidence-based prosecutions, but also will seek enhanced training in areas involving domestic violence and sexual assault and family violence, because we believe that this is at the core of a sickness that is plaguing our community. So I hope you'll stay tuned. Thank you.
Go ahead and open up to questions for either Ms. Merriweather or Sergeant Barnum.
Sergeant Barnum, what needs to happen next for this Family Research Center to get up and running?
So where we're at right now is we are actually in the process of creating a formal steering committee of a core group of individuals that represent the greater community and all of these different governmental, nonprofit, and community-based agencies that we're working with together. So we're in the process of creating that formal steering committee that will begin the physical boots on the ground strategic planning to make this a reality. And we're working hand in hand with the Alliance for Hope International, as the organization out of San Diego, to come in and get this program going from the ground up because they are the nationwide accrediting body. So if we're going to do it, we want to do it right. And we want to be sure that we're using the folks that have the results and the research proven to make sure we're implementing best practices for our victims.
Any sense of the timeline?
It's certainly funding is an issue, and that's one of the items that we will explore during the strategic planning process. It is my goal to have a family justice center operational in this county in under 3 years.
Do you have any idea how much it would cost?
It's hard to throw a number out at this juncture. What the folks that will assist us in our strategic planning will do is come in and do a site assessment, do an analysis of the services that we have, do an analysis of the budget that we're all spending already, because again, we're all going to continue doing what we're doing. We're just going to change the way that we do it. So in all honesty, there's not a tremendous amount of additional funding that's necessary. It's more of that coming together and pooling our collective resources.
Can you talk about how this would be used to get offenders to change their behavior?
Absolutely. So again, the Family Justice Center framework is very victim-centric. It's focused on victims. But what that does is it keeps those victims in every jurisdiction that's implemented these programs. They see greatly increased number of guilty pleas, a reduced number of jury trials, so it reduces the workload on the district attorney's office, and it keeps more victims engaged in prosecution. That has the direct result of holding abusers accountable. I will tell you that there are programs that add to the existing abuser education programs that we do have in this county. We have the county-funded abuser education program, as well as NOVA, or as well as IMPACT, which is the private abuser education program. There are services that are geared towards focusing on the offender, because at the end of the day, a lot of these abusers are also products of childhood trauma. And we know that if we don't fix and treat that trauma, that cycle is going to continue. However, those services will not be offered within the Family Justice Center for a pure aspect of confidentiality and safety. The Family Justice Center is 100% for victims as they transition to survivors.
So I take it this also lessens the chance that the victims will, drop out.
Absolutely.
And let these folks escape.
Absolutely. So when we provide a trauma-informed community to receive these victims, when we ask the question, why don't they just leave, right? Well, they can't just leave because they have nowhere to go to. When we provide them a safe place and the framework in which to make that exit, right, and give them the support that they need from folks who are trauma-informed and know that dealing with people who have just experienced tremendous trauma act differently, they tell their story differently. They don't tell their story in a nice, clean, linear fashion. The end result of that is they get the support they need, they stay engaged, they receive services, and they also stay engaged in prosecution.
Well, we appreciate it. Sorry, Jake. Mr. Merriweather, I mentioned thanks, sir.
Thank you.
On the front end that we've got a all-star cast. We really do when it comes to domestic violence and victim-focused programs. Safe Alliance. Mr. Merriweather, I think I could stay behind for a couple of minutes. So we have Sergeant Barnum. A lot of you, if you're really paying close attention, see a former retired Assistant City Manager Ron Kimball here, and I don't think anyone can speak more passionately about the need for this kind of thing than Ron, who lost his beautiful daughter several years ago to a tragic, just a horrible domestic violence-related incident. So please, I encourage you to take full advantage and leverage that if you're looking to personalize your stories. And we will do our level best to keep everyone up to date on the progress of that steering committee and how this all comes together. So there's that. Also wanted to circle back a little bit and talk about Kilbourne Drive. We've gotten a multitude of questions since Saturday morning, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the situation, just a horrible situation that developed out there in our Eastway Division Saturday morning around 8:30 in the morning. A father shoots his mom, shoots his wife, shoots his 11-year-old little girl. Mom and dad, or mom and grandma, they don't make it. They succumb to their gunshot wounds. Little girl in the hospital with a bullet lodged in her brain. They were successful, the trauma surgeons, in removing that bullet, but, and the prognosis seems to be that she's going to pull through, but, no saying what the quality of life is going to be there for this young lady. What some of us may not know is that there was also a 13-year-old little boy and a 7-year-old little girl, his sister, who actually ran from the home when all of this was developing and managed to get out safely and get to a neighbor's home just speaking with some of the advocates and some of the officers and detectives who are involved in this follow-up with this case, it's horrible. I mean, they lost everything. These little ones, clothing, all their clothing now is considered biohazardous material because of the scene. And I don't want to get too graphic in what the scene looked like there, but you could probably well imagine, given what the circumstances involved. There's been a GoFundMe account established, and we can go ahead and get you that information through the family, through family members. Hickory Grove Baptist Church is also doing a pretty big collection for the family and working with the family and those and what their needs are. So really, if you could do anything that would really be helpful is push this information out. We'll get this information to you. We know that this time of the year, people are just inclined to really be big-hearted and help in endeavors like this, and we would certainly encourage our community to look after this family who, they've got a lot to manage down the road. Speaking of managing, I spoke with a couple of sergeants from our East Wade Division. I'm not going to name any names, but, these people, and we probably don't say it enough, our first responders, medics, first responders, fires, first responders, when they see things like this, just hearing some of the stories coming out of Saturday, our people here in this organization that were on that scene are having an awfully difficult time with this. And I'm talking some of these people who've been around for quite a bit of time and seen some pretty bad things through the years. And to hear these stories coming from pretty tough men and women, veteran officers, it's humbling to hear that human side of what it is they do. So, just keep our folks and all the first responders in your thoughts and prayers through the holidays too. I know some of them are getting some grief counseling, working with trying to manage this situation. A lot of them have children of their own, so just try to keep that in mind as well. What do we have for the greater good?
I know there's family out there that Saturday, or I believe to be family out there that Saturday. Any talk of what motive could have been or anything like that?
No, that's something that I'm sure they'll go back and investigate. There's been some talk, and but there have been some issues out there, and I don't want to get into the extent of health conditions or anything else like that. But I'm sure that that's something that they're looking at very closely right now. Most important thing, I guess, if there's anything that can come positive out of this, and you'd really be hard pressed to find anything, is getting the children the help that they need out there.
And I apologize if I missed that at the beginning. Did you say what the relation of the 13 and 7-year-old, the other kids were the cousins, just friends?
Brother and sister of the 11-year-old and the daughter and son of the suspect.
We haven't seen a toxicology report yet. Is there any information on maybe if the dad had been consuming something?
Don't know if it's available. I will check. I wouldn't suspect this early on it would be available, just if history is any indication, Jane.
Were police familiar with that home at all? Had they responded there? Any number of calls?
I have not seen any calls for service on a original search that I did, but I can get back up with our analysts to do a deeper dive on that, Alex.
The church that's
Hickory Grove Baptist.
Yeah, was that a church they belonged to? Is that just a church that came out after the
Don't know if that's their church or if it's just a church that intervened. Hickory Grove Baptist they've done this before for other families in similar situations, especially when it's domestic violence related. So I'll find out for you if that is the family's church. We good?
Any update on changing gears, just on the string of gas station robberies we've seen, or update on the serial robber who's been hitting different restaurants, Starbucks, and things like that?
It's that serial robber that we all got together last week and talked about that serial robbery suspect, and he was responsible for 6 that we were able to determine at that point. Just so happens that it wasn't soon thereafter that he struck again. No new information there. Our detectives are working tremendously hard with community members, with our patrol divisions, moving resources appropriately, and really hoping with that and community involvement that we'll be able to pick this person up in the short order. Westinghouse Boulevard, no updates with regard to that, but I mean, robberies across the board are down statistically. Personal robberies across the board are down year to date. commercial robberies are up. And none of this really makes a bit of a difference, does it? You have a guy who was just, what was his crime? Showed up for work that day, out of that convenience store that night, you know, and gunned down senselessly. Apparently this isn't his first robbery, being the victim of a robbery, and he's complied before. And, you know, I think Chris Dozier, the captain of homicide, said it best yesterday. You know, it's really concerning when someone doesn't offer up any kind of resistance and finds themselves in a position like this. We've got to get this person. We've got to get this person.
Had he been robbed at that same store before?
I don't think it was that store. Who else? Just before we do wrap, and I don't think Sergeant Barnum mentioned it, tomorrow night we have our 5:30 tree lighting ceremony, just to really dovetails off of what we were talking a lot about this morning with domestic violence victims. Just really encourage you to come on out and support surviving family members. And it's always an emotional kind of an event, but it's an important event, and it's an event that we hope all your stations and newspaper can make it to. So, I'm sorry.
It's here. It's in the lobby of our LEC tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. It's a domestic violence memorial tree ceremony to commemorate the over 70 lives lost statewide and the 14 lives lost to intimate partner violence this year in our community.
As we're going to make them available for one-on-ones, please leverage that and speak with them and put together what you have to put together. And we appreciate the turnout this morning.